If you were locked in a mental hospital, how would you prove you are sane? And could you escape from there? In the 1970s, American psychologist David Rosenhan conducted such a crazy experiment. He contacted 8 of his good friends, pretended to be mentally ill, and then tried to see if they could get into a mental hospital. Among them were psychologists, doctors, artists, and so on. Including Rosenhan, there were 9 in total. To better play the role of mental patients, they went through a lot of materials, pretending to have certain mental symptoms, such as auditory hallucinations and delusions. After a period of training, the 9 people went to 8 psychiatric hospitals. Rosenhan went to a public psychiatric hospital in Pennsylvania, telling the attending doctor that he had auditory hallucinations. After that, he underwent many routine examinations, but in all aspects, he was obviously very normal. After repeatedly confirming, the doctor finally decided to admit Rosenhan.
But why admit him if he isn't sick?
Because he had the symptom of auditory hallucinations. At that time, the psychiatrists all followed a guideline, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This book describes many psychiatric symptoms.
As long as he meets the criteria, he can be determined to be a mentally ill person.
Yes, he had a reason to diagnose you. After being admitted, the nurse asked Rosenhan to take medication. Rosenhan followed the prearranged plan, pretending to swallow the medication, but actually hiding it under his tongue, then spitting it out and flushing it down the toilet after the nurse left. Afterwards, he immediately asked the doctors in the hospital, saying that his auditory hallucinations had disappeared and he was a normal person, asking when he could be discharged. All the doctors just smiled at him and ignored him. In all subsequent examinations, even if Rosenhan's physiological indicators were normal and he was clear-headed, no one paid attention to him. He endured until the doctor's prescribed treatment time ended, and finally, he was discharged. Rosenhan immediately contacted those 8 friends and found that without exception, none of them were discovered by the psychiatric hospitals to be faking it. Moreover, all their perfectly normal behaviors after admission were ultimately interpreted as pathological. They were all released only after the treatment cycle ended.
Hey, do you think if a person reaches this point, it can prove they are a normal person?
If your first impression is that he is a mental patient, then everything he does afterward will be considered pathological behavior. At this point, the experiment was not over. Rosenhan wrote about his experience in a paper, published it in a scientific journal, and it immediately caused a huge stir. This proved how unreliable psychiatric diagnoses were, and inevitably led people to wonder how many had been misdiagnosed as mentally ill and confined without seeing the light of day. This paper also drew strong criticism from the absolute authority in the field of psychiatry at the time, the famous American psychiatrist Robert Spitzer. Because Rosenhan, to avoid some legal issues, did not disclose which hospitals he chose, Robert believed that the psychiatric hospitals he selected were all unprofessional and that this experiment was just for attention.
I feel like he's just making excuses.
Because he himself is an authority, he is a vested interest. If someone challenges him, it's like taking away his livelihood. Therefore, he publicly issued a challenge to Rosenhan, inviting Rosenhan to send fake patients to his hospital within the next 3 months. And their professional doctors would definitely be able to immediately identify them. Rosenhan accepted this challenge. 3 months later, Robert's hospital released a report saying that they had identified 41 fake patients during this period. However, in reality, Rosenhan had not sent any fake patients during these 3 months. The hospital misdiagnosed again, and this incident dealt a severe blow to Robert Spitzer from both sides. Why was this event so sensational? Because Robert Spitzer was the leader and promoter of the publication of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It listed all known mental illnesses. In the 1950s, it was still a booklet, but now it has been expanded into a thick book with 886 pages, detailing 374 types of mental disorders.
Can everyone find a corresponding illness for themselves in this?
Anyway, I very roughly looked at this translation and found that I seem to have at least 8 mental illnesses. Such as schizophrenia, delusional disorder, and so on. So I started to feel a bit anxious. Then I suddenly remembered there's also a disorder called anxiety disorder. Right. So it might be 9, but I still feel I'm quite normal.
Did you know that assigning yourself mental illness symptoms is also a kind of mental illness?
That makes 10. We found a simple mental illness test. If you're interested, you can try it yourself. If a statement doesn't apply to you, score 0. If it somewhat applies, score 1. If it applies very well, score 2. There are a total of 20 questions. Add up the scores for each question. If the total is below 16, then it indicates you are normal. Between 16 and 30 points, you will be classified as a non-psychiatric patient, but with antisocial personality traits. Above 30 points, you will be considered within the psychiatric range. However, don't take this test result too seriously, as it is not a professional diagnostic test. According to unknown sources, out of every 100 ordinary normal people, 1 is a psychiatric patient, a 1% probability. But if all 100 people are entrepreneurs, then 4 are psychiatric patients.
Why?
Most entrepreneurs have a strong desire for control, a lack of emotional awareness, and so on, and they are good at labeling these shortcomings as charisma.
I think you have the potential to become an entrepreneur.
Really?
Become an excellent entrepreneur.
Some say the cold and ruthless nature of capitalism has created most of the mental illness behaviors, with its endless exploitation and oppression being eloquent, insidious, and cunning. But on the other hand, perhaps cold and ruthless capitalism itself is a kind of mental illness.